Hello, my name is Scott Perello. I'm the COO and a partner with the Building Envelope Group. Thank you for joining me today. Today, we're going to discuss project management basics. More specifically, an introduction to the responsibilities and processes involved in project management from beginning to end of a typical small to mid-sized project that you may encounter. Well, let's dive in. So just up front, just a little discussion about what it is we're going to talk about and kind of the high level of what project management is. Project management is a profession in and of itself that takes years of education and on-the-job training to fully master the science and art of this discipline and highly important function of a construction or a service provider company. Most senior project managers for contractors and service providers that perform these functions daily typically have college degrees in construction management or a similar discipline and many years of experience, both in the field to learn means and methods and application processes, as well as in the office to learn numerous processes such as estimating, scheduling, material procurement, contract and subcontract negotiation, client communication, job cost tracking, all forms of documentation. And in project management, it's all about document, plus numerous other requirements and processes you'll encounter in project management. So the intent of this introduction to project management basics is generally to provide individuals new to the project management world an overview of the responsibilities and processes involved in managing projects of various scopes and sizes that they may encounter over time. Furthermore, each individual section and item we will discuss today will typically require various forms and procedures to track and process each requirement or function. Customized forms and standard operating procedures will be specifically developed by myself and the team at BEG for our partners and their project management staff as they continue to develop and grow. So, basically each requirement, each step along the way will typically have some sort of a form, some sort of an Excel spreadsheet, some sort of a log, and it would be too extensive in this presentation to get into every detail. Also, in time, the forms and the templates will be customized for each member based on the type of projects, based on the personnel that are working for the BEG partner. The following sections generally represent the chronological or logical order to track from the beginning to end and keep records for most small to mid-sized projects that BEG partners will typically encounter in the first couple of years as they establish themselves in a highly specialized waterproofing and restoration world. So the section we'll discuss today are, the first one will be job startup and legal. 2, specifications, drawings, and reports. The third will be cost estimates. 4th, subcontractors and suppliers. The 5th, project records, costs, and schedules. 6th, correspondence, and 7th, closeout. And this particular rundown is a format that I've used for years in my project folder on the server when I'm running multiple projects or people on my team have been running multiple projects. So it's a pretty good organized way. You don't necessarily have to break it down this way, but I've found that it works pretty well. All right, so job startup and legal. Some items to consider and include, you have the contract with the client or a letter of intent. Typically during the proposal phase or negotiation, or whether it's just a low bid wins type of a situation, there'll be a contract that's executed in time and negotiated and executed between the contractor or service provider and the client. Sometimes projects get going before all the details of the contract are executed, but they want to get some upfront things going and get it on the calendar. So there'll be a letter of intent, possibly where they do not exceed monetary amount mixed into that. The proposals, proposals, there could be multiple revisions during the process. Bonding information, if applicable. Some projects require bonds, whether it be a performance and payment bond, which is used often in the public bid world, but even in the private sector, I see it from time to time that clients will require a P&P bond, as it's called, for maybe new contractors they haven't worked with yet. Permit requirements and the permits, whether it be a building permit, sidewalk use permit. There's a ton of requirements you might need depending on the municipality and the project scope. Pay applications or invoicing, billing. And bear in mind that these would typically be subfolders within a folder. I'm breaking it out this way to kind of just walk through the chronological order of a project, but you'll encounter these in one way, shape, or form, depending on what your process is. So say for billing, large projects often that go on for several months will require monthly billing in a pay application, sometimes on an AIA form, which is American Institute of Architects. They have a specific form that's well used in the industry, but it could be just a simple invoice with a monthly amount billed. A schedule of values is something that's used in the AIA form process, where you'll have a number of line items that will be billed against over time, depending on percentage of complete, whether it be mobilization or an individual line item of the scope. And then any approved change orders. Change orders are basically you have an original contract and specific scope items and monetary amounts. Over time, if things need to be added to the scope of work or even deleted from the scope of work, a change order is the contractual mechanism to add or delete monetary amounts or even scheduled days on the project completion date. You could include safety information. This could include a number of items. So JHA, JSA, that's basically a job hazard analysis or job safety analysis. They're pretty much interchangeable terms depending on what you use. It's basically a site-specific safety plan that talks about the anticipated hazards that you would probably encounter during the performance of the scope, and a form is written out that identifies the hazard and how it would be mitigated. Other site-specific information could be silica respiratory programs specific to the site. That's big in masonry work, concrete work, where there's grinding or demolition of masonry or concrete. Silica dust is extremely dangerous, and actually OSHA in the United States recently, several years ago, changed the requirements for silica protection. It's pretty intensive now, where it basically requires an engineered dust control system in place for all applications that could create silica dust. Also, you would have accident forms or SDS. They used to be MSDS, Material Safety Data Sheets. So now it's just SDS now. You can have those electronically with the workers on site, or you could have a binder. That's basically all the materials they would use on site, different chemicals and things along that order. It lists all of the hazards that they'd be working with. Project management checklists. The project manager, whether that's one person or a team, depending on the organizational structure, the size of the project, it would typically be a long list of all the things from beginning to end that you want to make sure are handled. And, you don't want to go out on a project without having planned ahead. Planning is critical to the success of any project. Turnover meeting agenda. This is, if it's applicable, some organizations will have the estimate performed by one group and the project management will be handled by another group. Some companies do them both within the same group. It varies from place to place. But basically, if there is a handoff from the person that put together the cost estimate and the proposal phase, and then a project manager or staff, maybe could be a superintendent with a project manager, they will have a meeting and go over every line item so that the handoff is handled appropriately and that all the details are discussed. You don't want the project manager taking on a project and not knowing what went into the estimate or production rates or something on that order, or maybe agreements that weren't really clear in the contract. Pre-construction meeting agenda and project emergency contact list. A pre-con meeting, as it's called, it depends on the project, depends on the client. A pre-con meeting is critical, even if it's just a simple phone call between the project management staff and the client. Just to go over the basics of when they're going to start the project, what the flow will be. It could be an in-house meeting on site with all the staff that will be affected by the project. But basically, you want to have an agenda for that meeting and make sure you touch all of the critical items that affect the property residents, the peripheral buildings, and the way it affects the general public, and a lot of other items. A project emergency contact list is pretty much what it says. You would want all team members of the project to have a list of the contact information for the contractor or service provider's team, as well as the owner's team and any other key subcontractors or whatever might be there. And then any other additional items or subjects that are needed. This is not a comprehensive list of things you will encounter in the job startup and legal phase, but this is a pretty good chunk of what you would typically encounter. Specifications, drawings, and reports. Some things to consider. So with BEG Partners, you all have access to 360 reporting tools, the software, and the report generation software. So we're making the assumption that most projects, if not all projects, will come from some sort of 360 report, baseline report, that conditions were found, that developed into a waterproofing or restoration scope. It could be a rapid response leak report that was generated when a BEG partner was called out to a site, that generated a scope of work that was needed, and a proposal and estimate followed thereafter. So things that would be included would be 360 reports, or any other reports that came from the building owner, or maybe a third-party engineer with photos, drawings and specs, specifications. If the owner has a third-party engineer that seeks bids or works directly with the service provider, they may have drawings and specifications that detail out the scope of work and the execution and the materials. They could have sketches or drawings that are just details, in addition to that are specific to one location or whatnot. Once again, you could have, you want to include all your baseline reports from your 360, rapid response leak investigation and closeout reports, any scope of work as it was developed after, say, a rapid response, and then a scope is developed with the proposal phase happening, and then any correspondence that's specifically related to that should be in this folder if you set it up this way, but it should definitely be addressed and considered before starting the project. A manufacturer's reports or written instructions. If there's specific materials that are going to be used, coating systems, sealants, masonry or concrete repair, mortars, whatever that might be, you want to make sure you have that information understood and in there. And any warranty requirements from the manufacturer, any written instructions, any details or sketches, you want to make sure that the team knows them, has access to them, and understands them. Certifications as well. There may be requirements that only certain personnel have certification training certificates before they work on a certain project with a certain system. And then any other additional items that might be needed. Cost estimates. So you would have project estimates, of course. That could be an Excel spreadsheet. I do other trainings on doing estimating itself, which is a process altogether where you analyze the scope of work, figure out production rates, figure out costs for materials, labor, subcontractors, equipment, formulate that into a detailed spreadsheet, and then figure out what overhead and profit margins would be, and produce the bottom line proposal, whether it be a line item, unit price proposal, whether it be a lump sum, whether it may be. You can also use proprietary software. There's a number of software tools that I've used over the years in lieu of Excel spreadsheets for long form estimating. Material quotes. So during the estimating phase, you're going to want specific quotes, especially on larger items where there's quite a few quantities involved, and get specific quotes from material suppliers. You might want to get two or three different manufacturers' products so you can compare them to get the best value in the lowest cost for the same result. Um, this information could also be found if you put it in a subcontractor and suppliers folder. Equipment quotes. You're going to want to include any rental equipment costs or quotes that you get. Even if you use your own equipment, those costs you want to make sure you capture in the estimate itself. Because that equipment still costs you money and you depreciate the value of it. So you're going to want to put the cost of a rental in there or whatever that might be. Subcontractor quotes. If you're going to use subcontractors, you want to make sure that those quotes are in there, depending on how you negotiate with your subcontractor. And we'll talk about this again in another section. Production rates and historic data information. When you're doing the estimate, you want to understand what the typical production rates are for a given scope of work. You want to understand, the cost associated with that. And over time, you'll develop your own in-house historic data for productions, depending on the personnel, depending on the scope, and a lot of other factors. You want to consider this information when building a cost estimate. A change order information. As I said before, a change order is when additional scopes are added or taken away, whether it be positive or negative change orders. You want this information to be in there because it's a contractual item that will need to be included in the pay application one way or the other once approved. So any scopes or forms or estimates, written directives from the client or third-party engineer, whatever that might be. Then again, in change order proposals, change order logs, whatever that be. And logs, tracking logs is a big part of being a project manager, especially on larger projects, because you can have multiple change order proposals, with multiple estimates over the course of a long project, and they need to be tracked. As to where they are at in the approval process, or even those ones can be revised, during their development. A project delay information for weather delays or what might be. Good communication is important for project management. So if there's ever a weather delay, the project management team wants to make sure they inform the client as soon as possible. And then that information is tracked because it will affect the project completion date. And that needs to be tracked. And there could be a change order that affects a certain, a pre-agreed upon completion date. And then any other additional items that are related to cost estimating would be in this folder or should be considered when considering the cost estimate. Subcontractors and suppliers. So some items to consider. Subcontractor lists. You're going to want to maintain a list over time that will hopefully keep growing and being modified depending on a lot of factors. Break them out by specialty, whether it be, caulking, whether it be coating, whether it be concrete repairs, whether it be scaffolding or, shoring, whatever it might be. And then cost model. You'll hear me talking a lot about, there's different ways to use subcontractors and there's different types of subcontractors. You have your typical pass-through subcontractors that you may need, such as an electrician or a scaffold contractor or something on that order. But then you might have some smaller sub-labor crews where you can have smaller teams perform the specialty services that you provide your clients. But at a lower cost model where you assist that small subcontractor with materials, with business development, with overhead, things along that order, and they provide labor and sometimes materials and whatnot at a much reduced rate, which allows you to realize a given profit that you want. You want to get subcontractor quotes as needed, throughout the estimating phase, as I said before. But as well as projects develop, This is not really a filing discussion as much as, but you want to make sure you capture this and file it somewhere that you know where it's at. Subcontractor agreements or work orders with a master service agreement. So basically put, there are a few ways to use subcontractors, but no matter how you do it, you always want to make sure there's a subcontract in place that protects you, make sure that they have all the requirements for certificates of insurance, which you'll see in the next bullet there as well. But you want to have an agreement in place on every single job, whether it's a year-long project or one day. There needs to be an agreement in place if there was ever anything that was to happen on the project or whatnot. And there's a couple ways to do it. One with a traditional subcontract agreement that's signed on a per project basis, or you could have a master service agreement. I've done this successfully in the past for subcontractors, where they, all the long form agreements are covered under one document, and then every time you have another small project or whatnot, you can write a simple work order that ties back to the master service agreement, and then you can renegotiate the master service agreement annually, or whatever that might be. Subcontractor bid forms, if applicable, on larger projects, especially if you want to or have access to a large pool of subcontractors that are qualified for a given scope. You might want to entertain multiple bids, and it makes sense to have them all make sure that they're apples to apples or bidding on the same thing. So I always like to put together a bid form that spells out exactly what they're going to bid on, what they have, what they don't have in their proposal, and it just allows the comparison of different numbers to be easier. Subcontractor change orders and change order logs, same thing. Just like you, the prime contractor with the client, would have change orders and change order logs that you track for extra work and whatnot. The subcontractor might be performing some of that extra work, and they in turn would have a subcontract change order. So you need to track those as well. And once again, logs are pretty typical for project managers to keep track of change order 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. Supplier and manufacturers lists. You want to make sure you know who all the different suppliers are and manufacturers are, so you have options. You keep it in a nice, neat, orderly file, broken out by division, broken out by specialty, broken out by product. It just makes it a lot easier when you need information. And if you need to contact the manufacturer's representative or the local supplier, or you want to, get a quick quote, it's good to have these lists readily available. Materials lists with suppliers, vendors, manufacturers. You definitely want to have a comprehensive list of all the materials you're going to need, with quantities, with everything you're going to need for purchasing, everything you're going to need for tracking. Obviously, that's for purchasing the materials themselves, but also understanding coverage rates and things along that order. That way you can track, are you applying the material at the right thickness, or, are you going to need more material, as you continue to track this? Was there more area than the estimate showed? Were there more linear footage? Things along that order. Purchase orders and PO logs. So every company's going to run purchasing differently regarding purchase orders, regarding cost codes, and there's multiple ways to set this up. And obviously, I can continue to work with our partners in developing a process and standard operating procedures for purchasing and cost codes that work best for them in their accounting systems and whatnot. And then finally, any other items to consider or to file that have to do with subcontracts, subcontractors, and suppliers. Project records, costs, and schedules. So as I said before, document. It's very important. Every project begins with the best of intentions. And obviously, our goal here isn't just project-based. Like some contractors, we're a service provider typically, and the long-term relationship with the client is paramount. So we always try to nurture that relationship, and every decision we make during a project we factor that in to see, how it affects the relationship. But sometimes things don't, go as planned. So every project, you want to make sure there's a written record of everything, any agreements, any change, things along that order, just to bring clarity if there are any conflicts, so resolution is clear. So things to consider, when in this section or this phase, would be the project schedule itself. So project schedules can be in many, many forms. As I said before, project managers typically, especially in larger projects like myself, go to college to learn critical path method scheduling, which is very advanced on very large projects that have hundreds, if not thousands, of tasks and how they relate with each other. As far as which has to finish before which one starts, is there a lag or delay? Is there float time? There's a lot that goes into that. But for the majority of projects we're going to deal with, we don't really need an advanced, comprehensive computer-generated schedule. Sometimes a simple bar chart or a Gantt chart or a graph can show a schedule, pretty simple with only a few line items. Or even best, what I've found in a lot of the work we do for exterior facade maintenance specifically, is a marked up photo, a Google shot from above with highlighted lines that show maybe where swing stages will be, with dates, given, with color coding, and then that would have weekly updates or monthly updates depending on what you have. That's a really good tool to use, and it's simple. As I said before, a complicated CPM schedule, most of the clients aren't going to really even understand what they're looking at on a comprehensive long form. But a simple mocked up photo, most people can get behind that and understand that. Updated project schedules you want to include in there. As I just said, you're going to want to update, whether it's weekly, whatever that might be, monthly. 2-week look aheads. So often, if it's a big project and there's a lot of scope items from the beginning to the end, sometimes what we want to do is just kind of zoom in with a separate little small schedule that just shows, hey, what's going to happen over the next week or two. And we're just going to include those items in a separate report to the team. And it can take the same form as any of these other types of schedules. Daily work reports. You're going to have in-house labor, most likely performing tasks. You're going to have subcontractors. You're going to have visitors to the site. You're going to have all sorts of activities and things that happen, incidents. So having daily work reports is critical, in my opinion, for any project. Every project should have some sort of daily work report. Now, that can be on a simple paper format, which I've used successfully. And it could also be on proprietary software. There's a number of programs out there that contractors use. Some of these software programs will generate daily work reports just from a handheld device. It'll include weather, and you can add photos. You can add notes and incidents that happen on the site. You can even have it so that certain information within the report gets sent directly to the owner every day or every week. So there's a lot of things out there, but on the same side, you can do the same thing with paper reports and just scan them and put them in the folder. So there's a lot of ways to do that, but as long as daily reporting in writing is happening. Timesheets and labor cost entries. Again, if you're going to have in-house labor performing any or all of the scope, you're going to want to track time. And this is where cost codes come into play. I'm a big proponent of cost codes for different scope items, whether it be grinding or cutting or caulking or coating or whatever it might be. Each individual task, in my opinion, should be tracked separately so that we can understand from the original cost estimate where we at estimated versus actual. It's a great tool for forecasting. It's a great tool for at the end of the project, analyzing it for historic data. Did we exceed goals? Did we fall under? Why? It's also a great tool during a long project. If you see you're slipping on certain tasks, you can, at least be aware of that and have a heightened sense of awareness. I've had many projects that started off with problems that with that heightened focus, we ended up improving things with slight tweaks in the means and methods and had successful results. Once again, you want to make sure all the time is there, accurate for, obviously payroll of employees, Whether that may be, you're going to want to track it daily, weekly, things along that order. You're going to have your spreadsheets and logs for tracking labor, for tracking costs over time, including T&M cost tracking. So that's time and material. So um, basically, sometimes during a project, they might want to do some extra work. Or maybe that it's a small project to begin with, and we just want to do it on time and materials with a certain an existing budget, or initial budget, I should say. And we want to track that as we go, so that if we need to extend the budget, we don't exceed the cost prior to getting written authorization. It could be a change order that we're tracking on time and materials. So this is where you would capture that information, put it into a log, put it into a spreadsheet, and make sure it's accurate and timely. Again, cost code. I'm a proponent of cost codes for everything, for labor, for material purchases, the material costs for a given labor line item, and equipment, things along that order. Manpower projection worksheets and forecasting. This is very helpful for the macro view, not just for one project, but for the project management team and operations team. You can forecast, how many workers you're going to need on a given project for so long. You can factor that in as it compares to the big project of managing the whole business for multiple projects, and where you're going to need manpower at a given time in the future. Very, very important stuff. Any other reports, whether it be accident or injury reports or incident reports, time lost injury information. What is a big part of the way businesses operate is any time lost injury affects your experience modification factor. And what that does is it increases the amount you pay on your workers' compensation insurance. And the larger the organization gets, the more it hits you. It affects the cost of insurance significantly. So keeping track of all this information, and it's also required by OSHA as far as tracking this and logging this stuff and turning it in annually. Final labor, subcontractor, equipment, material costs, that should all be included. At the end of any project, you have this information you've been tracking. You want to do kind of a post-mortem analysis on every job. You want to figure out which line items you exceeded expectations, which line items you went over on costs, why. Try to analyze that to the best of your ability. And that will help historic data for future estimating and planning. And then finally, again, any additional items or subjects that need to be discussed, filed, or thought about in this section. Correspondence, again, document. Any kind of correspondence should be filed in some way, shape, or form. Some are very specific to the requirements of the contract, and some are for, basically, peace of mind for any potential future conflicts or even litigation. So things to include: project submittals. So submittals are part of the construction project process on larger projects specifically, and even smaller projects when there's a third-party consultant involved. They typically will have a list of specifications and products that you can use, and then when you're ready to start the project, you must submit to them in written form a list of all the materials you're going to use, or any specific work plans they would want, things along this sort of. You would submit them in electronic form. It used to be in printed form, but typically electronic form these days. And they usually have to be reviewed and approved by the consultant or even the owner, depending on the requirements of the project. Project meeting summaries or meeting minutes. I tend to like the word summary. It tends to be less as a written transcript per se that could be used in some way against you. Summary is just kind of stating, all right, these are the general things that were discussed at the meeting, and everyone agrees that the spirit of the summary that was presented at the end or after the meeting. Some projects you're going to do, you won't even have regular progress meetings. Some you'll have every week or every other week. Every project's going to be different depending on a lot of factors. Pre-construction meetings would be the same thing. I honestly believe you should have a pre-construction meeting on every single job, every single time, no matter what the situation is. It could be, a full-blown meeting on site with all of the team members and everybody with the client and their tenants and everyone that's affected by a large project. And it would have a long summary of items and go over the scope, go over the logistics, go over the schedule. Or it could literally be a phone call between the project manager and the on-site staff with the property managers as well, to make sure everyone's on the same page as far as when you're going to start, what the hours are, lots of factors like that. So in an in-house pre-construction meeting too, it should always be an in-house meeting as well as a meeting with the client, and it can take on different forms. But this is where you would consider that, and this is where you would file any written agreements or minutes or summary. All right, so email correspondence. And sometimes on projects there are dozens, if not hundreds, of emails that go back and forth about, ancillary topics and things like that. But it's a good idea to file, especially anything substantive or anything that where an agreement was made or referred to in any way, shape, or form. I put here and kind of underline, always back up any verbal agreement with a follow-up email to all parties. I could give hundreds of examples of how I've seen people in the past not do this, and it bites them later. I remember just a simple example. It wasn't all that long ago in Washington, D.C. One of my teams in the service group was tasked with hanging a giant banner on the side of a building. The Washington Nationals just won the World Series. And the scope was it was a huge banner. It took a swing stage to hang up, basically thousands of dollars of mob and then demob to hang this big banner. And the agreement was the property manager paid us to hang this banner. And then there would be a parade. And then subsequently after that, the banner would be taken down, of course. What happened is that after the parade happened, the superintendent for my team was on site and was instructed by the on-site building engineer to take the banner down the next day, which he went and did. And probably halfway through that day, I got a phone call from our business development person. Said the property manager was upset because he did not authorize that to come down that day. He wanted to leave the banner up for a few more days. Of course, I contacted our superintendent and found out what happened, and basically put, they did not inform the property manager about what was discussed on site. So what should have happened is the superintendent should have told our coordinator or whatever, the project manager, have that put in writing in an email to say, as discussed on site today, we will be taking the banner down tomorrow. Copy all parties, not just the one you talked about it with. And then what probably would have happened is that property manager would have saw that email, jumped on that and said, hey, no, I would rather wait a couple more days. Let's do that. And then because ultimately, I was between a rock and a hard spot, so I authorized my team to go back there on my dime and pay to put it back up with swing stage and of course have it come down. It cost us a fair amount of money. And it really wasn't even our fault, but we did not properly inform all parties. Even though it became a he said and she said thing, I made the decision to just eat that cost. So always back up any verbal agreement with a follow-up. So much so that I put a process in that at the end of each day, every on-site, especially the superintendents that drive around, that talk on site, if there's anything that was discussed today, always put it in a summary email. And it could be as simple as discussed today on site, we will go ahead and do 1, 2, 3, 4. Mid-morning check-ins. I came up with this in a service group. I think it's really good on small projects, especially when it's reactive, say rapid response stuff or small projects. Get get the team on site, first thing in the morning, whatever that time is agreed. But don't wait till the end of the day and call or email and say, hey, how'd it go today? Often, problems will happen, and they're already having issues related to that. I always would have my team email them and call them mid morning. Give them a 2 or 3 hour, give them a couple hours to get going. And then, hey, how are things going for you? It's almost like the restaurant when the waiter or waitress leaves the food and then comes back shortly after and say, hey, how's it going? It's really about the timing there. It's very important, in my opinion. And that'll ensure client satisfaction and that they have a good experience, because that's what this is about. Obviously, we want to give a quality product, but we also want them to have a good experience. Weekly update emails and calls to ensure client satisfaction. Again, mid-morning check-ins could be on small jobs, maybe day one, maybe day two. But an ongoing project would probably be weekly emails, things along that order. But communication is critical, especially when you deal with property managers. A weather delay correspondence. As I said before, you want to track this stuff. If there's a weather delay, you don't want to just not show up and assume that they know. You want to send an email to everybody as early as possible in the morning, or even the night before if you've already called it, and say, we will not be on site today, so on and so forth, and then track that in a log, because it might affect the contractual obligation to be done by a certain date. And in your contracts, always make sure that you cover yourself with, with a schedule that says weather dependent. A transmittal lists and logs. This is an old project manager term. They're still used today, transmittals. But a long time ago, pretty much everything was done snail mail or even fax machines. But basically there's a transmittal list, and all it is just a cover sheet, similar to an old fax cover sheet, for those that remember them. That would just basically say, herein is including, this change order or this submittal or this material sample or whatever it might be. Sometimes if you're going to ship something, through FedEx or UPS, you would have a transmittal sheet there, and you would have a log. And basically at the end of the project, you have a list of everything that was sent, everything that was said, document. Incoming correspondence, whether it be via regular mail or shipments, you want to kind of notate that, have that somewhere in the project folder, that you have the date and the time, because this is just life. Things sometimes get misplaced and assumptions are made. Hey, I sent such and such to you, I never received that, and then it's all this kind of back and forth. It's always good to document everything. Internal and or third-party testing or QC reports, inspections, whether it be pull tests for joint sealant installation, whether it be any kind of quality control, or whether it be a third-party, concrete cylinder test. There's so many things that might be applicable here. You want to make sure you track that, you keep it in a log, and you file it. RFIs. Request for information. This is a big part of the project management and construction process. To basically define it at the highest, simplest level, all projects are based on certain assumptions at the beginning of the project. So, the contract is based on a set of drawings, a set of specifications, or a written proposal that make all these various assumptions. And it's important in your proposal you list those assumptions. Because if you encounter something that's unforeseen, or maybe, the drawing doesn't correlate with what they find in the field, you can't, as a contractor or service provider, just take it upon yourself to go ahead if it doesn't, correlate. Otherwise, any costs associated with that, you take liability and responsibility of. So anything that varies along the way, or unforeseen conditions, you should always send a question in the form of a RFI, or a request for information, to the one designated to answer such things, whether it be an architect or third-party engineer, whether it be the client. Maybe the scope said, match existing blue paint, and they get up there and it's green. Don't just paint it blue. Write an RFI, or you can get on the phone. You can get on the phone and ask, hey, did you want blue or did you want green? And if they say, well, no, we want it green, that's fine. And then you can go ahead and do that, out of customer satisfaction and service. But at the same time, make sure that somebody writes an email. Hey, as discussed on the phone, we are painting that wall green. So you should probably log that as an RFI. So some are more formal and some are more loose, but you need to make sure there is a documentation of any questions and the answers. And then finally, any additional items, correspondence, document. So finally, closeout. So at the end of the project, whether it's once again a couple of days on a small rapid response project, or a leak investigation, or maybe a small rapid response repair from that team, or it could be a 3-month project or a 2-year project. Everything must have a formal closeout. Some are more intense and have more items included. Some are just pretty simple. But all of these items at a minimum and others should be considered. So what would you include? Well, any labor and general warranties. On typical projects, if you're going to warrant your work for, say, a year or 2 years, whatever that might be, most of the time they're going to want to see just a simple letter form, that says, that you will warranty that the products installed were installed as specified, and any non-conforming work that was installed will be repaired and replaced, at the contractor's expense. Remember, when it comes to warranties, very, very, very important in the waterproofing industry specifically, you're not warranting, say, the scope itself per se. You're not warranting the entire building envelope. If you install, say, joint sealants at all joints on the side of a facade, what your warranty is saying is that I warrant that the joint sealants that were removed and replaced at all these locations were installed per manufacturer's and industry standards. You are not warranting that the building will never leak again. You are not warranting any other facade component where water could get in. So be very, very careful about what that means. A lot of people misunderstand that. They have the assumption that if you replace all the joint sealants on a facade, that the building's never going to leak again. Now, doing all the replacement of the joint sealants, will that mitigate a lot of issues? Most likely, but water can get in from lots of sources. Manufacturer's warranties, typically with joint sealants or any kind of coating system, or these manufacturers offer warranties, whether it be 5 years or 20 years, whether it be for joint sealant replacement, coatings. You can get warranties of all sorts of time spans and all sorts of conditions associated with them. But basically put, all they're warranting is that the material itself that was installed was sold to the contractor or service provider as advertised in their specifications. So, when it really comes down to it, if the contractor or service provider, offers a 2-year labor warranty, and 5 years later, under a 10-year manufacturer's caulking warranty, there's an issue, often, more times than not, it's not going to really do a heck of a lot for the client, because unless it's proven that there was something wrong with their material, they'll typically say, well, it's just regular wear and tear, or it wasn't installed properly, so beware of that. But anyway, this is where, manufacturer's warranties, test reports, any correspondence associated with that, you would probably want to keep in one tidy place so that you can hand the client their warranty. A punch list. So punch list is a term in construction that, pretty much as you close towards the end of the job, you feel you're substantially complete. And I'll explain that momentarily, what that means. But, basically, you're going to do, a survey of the drop. Now, if you're doing a swing stage job, you really don't want to access a given drop of swing stage and, again, to do a punch list. Or a final review of what you did to look for minor little defects that you should probably repair before you move over. So it's definitely in your interest as a service provider to punch, as they say, or to review your work and fix any little minor blemish or detail before you move over, or you're going to have to come back. So punch list reports, logs, if there's a signed approval process, sometimes it's in the service provider's interest to have the owner sign off as you go. So on a large project, if you've moved over several months ago and something happens to, maybe damage, you're not going back on your dime and repairing that. You probably do a final walkthrough with the client, maybe with the engineer, written report that says, we saw this final list of punch items, or everything was fine, and you sign off on that, put that in there. So the 360 report process, as you know, 360 reports are often used for, three primary items. Would be the baseline report during maintenance services, which, will uncover some issues often. It'll be the rapid response team for a leak investigation, or it'll be a closeout report for whether it's a small project or even a large project, where there'll be a lot of photos, whatnot, and before and after photos of what was done. So that would be included there. So the final 360 project completion report, that would be included, and obviously sent to the owner. Letters of substantial and final completion, if applicable. It depends on the contract requirements. If it's a lengthy project with an in-depth, contract, whether it be AIA contract or similar, often there's very specific requirements of what substantial completion and final completion are. Substantial completion generally means at the highest level where a given area is completed for the intended use. So in other words, it can be occupied, it can be used for its intended use, but there might be a couple little items that need to be completed, maybe some touch-up paint or something along that order. Final completion would be after that, and it would include any kind of retainage in billing or something like that. I did not mention during the monthly billing process in the previous section. Often what happens is on a big project, depending on what the owner's requirements are or third-party consultant requirements are, you would have retainage. And what that basically means is that either 5% or 10% of every month's pay application will be held back as kind of insurance for the owner that you're going to finish the project, and that if there's any issues at the end of the job, that the contractor or service provider will make good on those. So once the final is done, then you can bill for all the retainage. And once again, 5 or 10% of a $1 million job, it's a fair amount of money. You want to make sure you get that. So that would be the final pay application in the next line. And then in lien releases. So typically on a monthly project, when you're billing or you're submitting your pay apps, you're going to have lien releases, which pretty much releases the owner of any potential liens against them up to a certain dollar amount that's already been paid. And then on the final pay application, you'll have a full lien release that protects the owner from getting a lien from a subcontractor or material supplier. And then finally, in some projects, you have what's called an O&M manual, operation and maintenance manual. It's typically not used a lot in the waterproofing and restoration world, but sometimes. But it's typically for equipment, things along that order, mechanical systems, elevators, that kind of thing. And then any other additional items or subjects that are related to the closeout. Finally, review the 360 project completion report and discuss overall project issues that came up, or how the progress went with the client, to ensure that they're 100% satisfied. Not just with the quality of the work, but also the experience that they received. Very important. It's not just about the project itself. A focus is not just to get projects; it's to acquire and nurture and retain long-lasting relationships through service to our valued clients. So that's pretty much it. I know there was a lot to digest there. There's a lot that goes into the management of a project from beginning to end. And as I said before, the skill set that's involved to be a seasoned project manager, I spent many years of my life doing that very role. and still do from time to time on certain projects. So hopefully this was helpful. As I said before, every one of these functions and tasks will probably have a specific Excel spreadsheet log or application used or whatnot, and I will work with you, and the team will work with you to custom build these various components that works best for you and your organization. As always, if you have any questions, reach out to me. This is my cell phone. Give me a call, say hello, shoot me an email, and I'll be happy to get back to you. Thanks again, and have a great day.